Organized religion, it has a lot more structure. I've seen people needing more structure, more boundaries put in place. My father was the pastor, so all eyes were on me. I don't know why people are waiting so much. It's like to just take even just the first step, and maybe you're drawn to some class or a place. It's like just do it. I'm also introducing how luxury, means things like sustainability, time, experiences. So it's my passion, and I'm excited to share that in a new container.
Hello, and welcome to the Revolutionizing podcast. This podcast is about using spiritual wisdom, insights, principles, and practices to integrate and embody into your life in a practical way. My guests share their story of their spiritual journey, as well as how their spiritual beliefs, insights, and practices have helped them live a better life. Their life stories help others understand and accept life's challenging opportunities for learning, expansion, and growth. And my guest on today's Schultezar podcast is all the way from California right now, born in South Dakota, Morgan Greenseth. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Schultezar podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeffrey. It's a pleasure to be on here.
Yes, we connected a while ago, and it's kind of hard to keep up with Morgan because she's all over the world, and I'm jealous. She was just telling me before we started our recording that she's heading off to Australia, and I was there a number of years ago, and it's an amazing place. Morgan, why don't you start off by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your spiritual journey?
Sure. I come from a small town in South Dakota called Wall, and I grew up in a very Christian household, but always wanted to see something more. I'd always wanted to travel, and with that, and even with my parents' divorce, that brought me into wanting to travel more as the hotel became this second home for me. And with all of my travels that I would be doing from small on, and one of the benefits about growing up in South Dakota is we could drive a car when we were 14. I was able to go to the neighboring states and experience those places from the music and the culture. And from then on, as soon as I could move out from my family home, I was set to explore the world. Found California, and then went to Italy, and then back to Washington State, and over to New York. And really, really grew my career in design. And it wasn't until I had truly like a breakup from someone that I had been spending a lot of time with, where I just really opened my eyes on how far away I had come from being in alignment with myself, and started making the changes on what I wanted. And so I moved to Manhattan, and went to Burning Man, went to New Zealand, and had a retreat there, like really treated myself to taking care of myself for 2 weeks, which I hadn't ever really done, to find out what I wanted to do. And it completely shifted my life. And for the past year, I ended up living in Tulum, where I did a lot of healing work and really finding out who I am as a person and where I want to be going. And it really introduced me to my soul family. And now I'm on my second phase of this journey, where I'm pretty much packed up what I thought was a home, a physical home, and now see that in myself and in the few belongings I have. And like I said, like you mentioned, I'm about to head out to Australia, and I don't know what's next, but I'm really trusting and feeling the calling to just follow my intuition and my heart.
Excellent. Good for you. When did spirituality come in to your journey? And it's interesting that you were raised in a small town, because so was I. And there's nothing like getting a small town perspective and then realizing how big the world really is. It for those that have always, been based in larger centers, small town living is very different. Not to say that it's better or worse, but very different. And like you, I'm very fortunate that I've had an opportunity to experience both small town living and big city living and seeing the world. But how did spirituality find its way into your life?
Well, it felt like it was woven in from small on, like, in a small town. It's not like I was exposed too much. There were limited offerings there. And in all honesty, my father was the pastor. So all eyes were on me and what I was doing. But I was very interesting things as a child. From, I was looking into astrology. I was into yoga. I wanted to stop eating meat from small on. But I didn't quite understand, where it was coming from. So when I started to truly tap into that more was in New York. That's where it really started to accelerate. And I had done this weekend trip in upstate New York, and a friend had given me this book about surfing the Himalayas, and that book really changed my life. And at the same time was introduced to a healing center called Maha Rose in Brooklyn, which taught all kinds of different modalities that I was like, oh, wow, people are, I was learning about Reiki and what that was, and tarot reading. And so that got me interested. And all while at the same time, I heard about Deepak Chopra and Oprah's free meditation experience. So I started diving into that. And granted, back in South Dakota, when I was in high school, I got into meditation, but I was doing it with techno music. And, somebody's mother was like, I don't know if you should be mixing those two modalities. And I was like, I don't know. So it was very experimental, but I didn't quite know what it was until much later on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell me, I didn't realize that your father was the pastor, so there's a great opportunity for you to give us a perspective, having been born and having a parent that is more deeply entrenched in the religious doctrine, and then opening yourself up to spirituality. What do you see as the difference between religion and spirituality? And although there's some commonality, and I don't like to sort of make that distinction, but I know a lot of people do. From your perspective, organized religion versus spirituality, what do you see as the difference?
From my perspective, and what I saw is organized religion, it has a lot more structure. I've seen people needing more structure, more boundaries put in place. With spirituality, I've learned to create those boundaries myself, these different containers to kind of work within and study. And with the church, they have those in place, and you can be like, okay, I'm aligning with these rules per se, and I kind of choose to follow what this is being taught, and it's much more firm, at least in my experiences, where spirituality to me is a bit more fluid. I mean, you can learn, there are different ways, and they resonate differently with different people, and I see how it benefits certain types of people. But for me, I really like the fluidity or creating it around what I want and tuning into myself more. Where the religion, organized religion, it has, much more of the I don't want to say like rituals because that's a little it's sensitive, but there's a certain type of scheduling or practices that are much more regimented or regulated.
Yeah. I get a sense of what you're saying. To me, I think sometimes organized religion is a little bit about more control. And as you were talking, the analogy came up. Do you want to go to, the traditional school system, or would you rather go to an alternative school, or homeschooling, I guess, would even be a better example of the spiritual journey. I see spirituality as developing your own personal relationship to the higher power, and organized religion sort of, in a more controlling way tells you what that relationship should be. And just as more people are opening up to different ways of being educated, less structured, less curriculum based, I see spirituality, and I see the spirituality movement appealing to those people who want to have more of an individual relationship, as I say, to the divine, as opposed to a collective relationship. I think organized religion is more around the collective relationship. Would you agree with some of those comments?
Yes, I agree with those. It's a great way of describing them.
And how did your father take when you went off? How did he respond when you went off on your spiritual journey? Have you discussed it with him? How is that relationship?
I haven't actually discussed it with him. I think I've been very open about it through my social media, both on Instagram and Facebook. And it's interesting because Facebook is a bit more of the collection of my family and relatives. And I used to segregate the two to allow, my friends who knew me to see this side of me. But as I came out of the spiritual closet, I've just been much more open, but we've never sat down and had a discussion about it. And part of it was, in my journey, I saw that it's two separate and very different things. And I, really, there was a part of my journey where I really shunned organized religion. I was like, no way, that is not me, at all. And from then I've kind of learned to be like, no, this offers something for people. It's just might not be for me, but it does help others. So it's been a journey, and I'm still slowly figuring out how I want to have that discussion with him. I think it would be great for us to sit down and talk about it.
Yes, but you raise a good point. That happened to me as well when I went on my spiritual journey. You have to separate yourself a little bit from the religious upbringing in order to find your spiritual legs, to find that individual relationship. And just like you, I've come to see it not as a bad thing. After you separate and feel more comfortable with your own spiritual beliefs and principles, then you can be more understanding. I know when I went on my journey, my spiritual journey, my journey of self-discovery, I wanted to see if I could find some relevance in my religion, and I was raised of the Jewish faith. And so I met with a rabbi for a number of weeks. He was very willing to come over to our condo, and I studied with him because I really wanted to see if I could reconcile what I was learning, and I couldn't at the time. And so I went off and pursued my own spiritual beliefs. But as you have come back to respect and understand that it's not for everyone. So I think it's really important that we respect that the people in organized religion respect the people who are on their spiritual journey that does not include organized religion, and vice versa. The people on their spiritual journey to respect those that still choose organized religion. The key for me, anyway, is to have a relationship with the divine. I was just thinking about that over the last few days. For me, life would be so hollow, so shallow, so challenging, so difficult if it was just the human journey. And for me, having spirituality to shine some light, to give me a different perspective of more than just the human journey I am on, really, really helps me understand life and find it more tolerable.
I agree. Like when you were speaking, it reminded me of time during my time in Seattle, Washington. And it's interesting, the timing of that, reflecting on it, because that was the time of when I was fresh out of grad school, was ready to get in the workforce, and then the recession happened. And, I was able to create something new with my work and do something different that's really changed my path. But there was one moment I was sitting in my apartment being like, well, I think I should be spiritual or something, because it would be nice to believe in something. Because at that time I was so far away from any of that, and, had that thought, and it didn't really, come about too much later, but it was the realization, like, yeah, maybe it would be nice to, have someone to talk to, have something, to help.
Yeah. And so, Morgan, how has spirituality helped you in your journey so far? And certainly you have a long piece to go, because you're young, and I love talking to young people because they give me a different perspective, and I get so inspired because you have so much of your life ahead of you. But how has your spirituality helped you so far on your journey? See if you can imagine, where you are now without any spiritual beliefs, and how your spiritual beliefs have helped you do whatever it is you're doing.
Well, for one, I have a very limitless, or a lot of fluid boundaries. So it's helped me to ground and have a daily practice where I ask myself or reflect on, where I'm at, where I'm going, and to be present, to actually stop for a moment and look around and be like, wow, look at where I'm at, and appreciate being present, because so much of before, when I had that, I was so future focused on, where I'm going, what goal am I going after, where I was just missing what was around me, and the beauty in that. Also with spirituality, I'm a lot happier. Having faith and trusting, I'm able to just be a lot calmer. I've seen that a lot in especially in this past year. I've been reflecting, being that I moved away from Tulum, and that was I feel that's a huge spiritual journey in itself, but it's really transformed me as a person, where I'm not as angry or competitive or untrusting. So it's really been a blessing to have that in my life, and also just to release a lot of the worries, the day-to-day worries that a lot of us kind of like to hold on our shoulders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt that through your spiritual journey, you tend to be more focused on the present moment, and there are a lot of spiritual teachers that talk about that. Shaltazar has many messages about being in the here and now, and it's so interesting, because without spiritual beliefs, without belief in a higher power, all you really have is your human life. And yet so many people are in such a hurry to figure out their future that they don't really enjoy the journey as they're going along. And I remember at one point, before I really truly connected to believing in a higher power, I thought I had this many years on this planet to do what it is I had to do. And then it was over, I'd go into the ground. And as you say, that can be very, very stressful. And having these spiritual beliefs and realizing that what we are doing is more than just for us, is for the collective consciousness. I would agree with you that being spiritual can often take the pressure off of the human that feels he or she has to perform.
Right. And that where you were mentioning the point about not being present, that I think back to the times when I was living in New York and before a lot of my awakening really happened. And, I was literally running marathons and just so focused on crossing the finish line that I wasn't enjoying the parks, the trees, the people passing by. And I was like, well, this is not a way to live. It's painful.
Yeah, exactly. I remember back when I was in Ottawa, I was coaching a gentleman who was very driven and very future focused and goal oriented. And I in one of our coaching sessions, I just asked him the question, so close your eyes for a minute and imagine you have everything you now want in life. You've achieved it all. What next? And he had this puzzled look on his face, and he said, well, it's one of two things. Either I'll fall back and lose something and have to drive for it again, or I'll realize that I want more. And, and when he said that, I think he realized how he was sentencing himself to this life of striving but never arriving. And I really believe that in your spiritual journey with the spiritual beliefs that you can find in your life and the spiritual teachings and the spiritual practices, you can become more journey focused. You can enjoy the striving and don't ever worry about not arriving, because you will realize that none of us ever really arrive.
Right. And I love that you mentioned enjoy, because I think that's such a great word, where I feel like I'm resonating so much with just enjoy your life, enjoyment, and really finding like what is enjoyment for you right now has been something I've been thinking a lot about.
Right. And that's not to say, and that's not to belittle the fact that we will have our trials and tribulations, we will have our challenges, but to always try to move towards the joy. Maybe you won't get there all of the time, but whether, I come across in my practice so many people that are having relationship challenges, that are having health challenges, that are having financial challenges. Well, in the midst of those challenges, try to find a moment of joy, try to find that peace. And, by becoming more present, moment focused, I believe that you can do that. What advice would you give, Morgan, to young people just beginning their spiritual journey?
I would say, see if you can find a mentor. It's really helpful to have someone to check in with and reflect on what you're learning with, because sometimes it can feel like you're the only person going through these things, these experiences, and you're alone, or at least that's how I felt. And it was so refreshing to meet people that were either going through it or had gone through it, and just to talk and share. And then you'll find, others that have shared those experiences as well. But that was so helpful to have. And then also because it's not like once you've started the journey, or there's not like an end, to have someone that you can check and learn from and grow with is really important. And, the mentor could be someone like a coach, or it could be, your friend or something, but it's really helpful to have someone to check in with.
I agree. You bring up a really, really important point. When you talked about the beginning of your spiritual journey, you talked about a book. And I have seen so many people and witnessed and talked to so many people whose journey began with a book. Mine did. It was The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. And I've mentioned this on the podcast a number of times. But you and I are not alone. Often it is a book that begins your journey. And that's great and that's terrific. But the relationship you have with a book is very different than the relationship you have with a mentor or a support group, because it's very one way. You read the book, you get the print, and you can't talk back and you can't ask the author because it's just a book. And so the next stage or the next step after opening up your mind to the possibility is to find that support. And again, we've talked about this on the podcast a number of times, whether it is an individual coach or mentor, and I certainly love the work that I do. I'm so honored and pleased to be able to be the coach and the mentor for so many people. I love it. But if not, there are online forums, there are chat groups, there are meetup groups. Support is so important. A lot of people that I talk to feel very alone, just like you. They come, their family upbringing isn't as open to this spiritual journey that they begin, and they're kind of very tentative as to talk about it. And many times I've seen very, very gifted people with connections to the invisible world squash those because they don't have the support of other people, and they don't have other people to help them realize and nurture those gifts. So finding your community, finding support I would agree with you 100%. It's vital. Otherwise, you're limiting the possibility. Don't forget, this isn't, we talked about before, organized religion. When you're on this individual spiritual journey, you can't go to church or synagogue or to the mosque. So you have to find your own community. And the good news is that I believe spirituality, individual spirituality, is growing by leaps and bounds. And I'm always astounded when I meet someone new, and I'm a little reluctant sometimes to sort of talk about spirituality, but I'll just drop a few words or a few hints. And it's amazing how people will say, yes, I agree, and I've done the same thing, and and there's this there's this sense of you found family.
Yes. Yeah. I've shared something like that when I was helping out on this very conscious late night talk show that's being filmed right now in Venice Beach, California, called Optimistic. And it was interesting because, spirituality in media kind of has this certain aesthetic that's being projected right now, where, we kind of think spiritual people look a certain way and listen to a certain type of music. But on this show, especially the after parties, when you would be speaking to everyone, everyone is normal, what do I say, normal, but just, people that you could see in any city, anywhere in the world. But all of us were there because we were in touch with, spirituality in some way. And it was so refreshing and so awakening to see all these people of all walks of life and backgrounds and careers. And we're like, and it was so easy to drop in, and our conversations didn't go to the typical, what do you do? Where are you from? It just went so much deeper, which was really fascinating and exciting. And everyone there had such wonderful things to say and speak about. And the one common thing was being in tune with spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like being with family that you never met.
Right, exactly.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because one of the messages of Sheltazar talks about trying to get in touch with that part of you that is your higher self. And the analogy they use is, imagine that you you're born twins, but you're separated at birth, and you come back to meet, your other twin. But to enhance the analogy, that other twin has been raised on another planet far away. And so now all of a sudden, the two of you are together, raised on very different planets, trying to build this relationship. And one thing I will definitely agree with you. Once you say spiritual, there's like a foundation. There's an opening up, I'll meet someone and I'll say, I'm very spiritual. And they say, so am I. And as you said, I as you were describing it, I could resonate with it so strongly, because all of a sudden you feel accepted and you're willing to open up, even though their spiritual beliefs might be very different, because spirituality is a continuum. of course. There's a lot of different spiritual beliefs, just as there are a lot of different religious beliefs. But there's a commonality when you meet someone that says they're spiritual that's kind of interesting.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So we are drawing near the end of the time for the podcast, but before we go, is there any advice that you can give people, especially young people, either starting out on their spiritual journey or in the midst of their spiritual journey from your experience, and also any practical applications for some of your spiritual beliefs that you have come to honor and find for yourself?
Sure. So my biggest advice is with timing. And I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, when I have this, I'll do that," or when this comes. And it's like, just do it now. Just whatever you want to do, just do it, and it happens. I don't know why people are waiting so much. It's like, just take even just the first step, and maybe you're drawn to some class or a place. It's like, just do it. And that's right. How I've been able to live my life and go and see all of these amazing places and hence meet people and have these experiences. So, in quoting Nike, just do it. Like, seriously.
No, and I love it. That's exactly what I was thinking. Just Nike. And then when you were saying take that first step, I was thinking of the Lao Tzu quote: "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step." And that's exactly. Fabulous advice. Because often what holds us back is the mind telling us not to listen to that yearning or that nudging from the spirit within, and that intuitive nudge. A lot of people in the beginning don't understand how it works, and so they allow their mind to talk themselves out of it. So that is fabulous advice. I highly concur with that. You can't understand the power of your intuition until you give it a chance and follow through and do a Nike, just do it, when that nudging or that inkling comes up. Mm-hmm.
And to your second part of the question about kind of tips and things, it's how I came across finding you. Is I really enjoyed using Insight Timer as a way to find meditations. Meditation's been really helpful in my practice, and now I'm at a point where I'm doing it morning and night. But at first it just started off where I could do 5-10 minutes a day. But this particular application and platform not only allows me to see who's meditating worldwide, you can, link in your friends, see what they're meditating, but the ability to speak, to reach out to, like how I did with you, or to also reach out to other people in your neighborhood or halfway around the world and say, "Hey, thanks for meditating with me." I think it's a very beautiful, simple, if they have both free and paid options. So it's been a really great tool in my toolbox, especially when, at the very least, having a phone around is great to have for your spiritual practice.
No, I totally concur. And talking about, as you did in the beginning when you were a teenager and your meditation to the music that would not be considered that meditative, Insight Timer has a tremendous variety and diversity of kinds and types of meditation. And as we said earlier in the podcast, find what works for you. And so something like Insight Timer gives you the opportunity, if you find some meditations that work, do more of them. If you find some that don't work, keep looking, because there's everything from talks to lectures to meditations. One of my previous guests, Rachel Hillary, has actually started to put up meditations on Insight Timer because she couldn't really find things that resonated with her. And so she decided to share her way of meditating and has a number of meditations up and has thousands of people that listen to them. So I'm a big fan of Insight Timer. They gave me an opportunity to share the messages of Sheltazar and my love and wisdom. So that's great. I can't believe that our time is just about up. Morgan, why don't you share with the visitors a little bit of self-promotion? I know you're going off to Australia, but technology is pretty amazing. We can find you even in Australia, even though there's a time difference. Tell us a bit about yourself and how people can get in touch with you and why they would want to get in touch with you.
Sure. So part of this journey that I'm on and going to Australia, I'm working with hoteliers and anyone involved in the hotel and hospitality industry on the kind of updating or upgrading them to new versions of 5D luxury. So if you want to follow me on that journey, it's Instagram's the best way to do so at cosmic.morgan. And basically with what I'll be doing is using existing hotels and spaces because right now we have everything we need, and helping the owners and the operators to breathe new life into them and update the standards and what luxury means. And, everyone has a different definition of what luxury is to them, and that's a part of it. But I'm also introducing how luxury, means things like sustainability, time, experiences. So it's my passion, and I'm excited to share that in a new container. And if those, something new that I'm working on is also Benny, and you can follow me on itsbenny.com/agent/Cosmic Morgan. I have great tips on where to stay when you're traveling. Right now, it's just in the U.S., but we're going to be expanding worldwide.
Fabulous. Because, speaking of travel is certainly a very spiritual experience because it is very opening. It is very, it helps us understand the diversity of the human experience, but also the connectedness of the human experience. And so good for you for bringing spirituality into travel. Thank you so much, Morgan. You've been a wonderful guest. I appreciate it. Any final words for the listeners?
Well, nothing comes to mind except for, my spiritual guide comes to me in the pineapple, and I think it's such a beautiful symbol where it's not only just a way of fruit, but there's so much you can do with it, and it continues. You can cut off the top and plant it. So I'm just going to leave you with that because that's my little...
Excellent. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. Have an amazing time in Australia. Again, I'm really jealous because it's an amazing place. Once again, my name is Jeffrey Eisen. I am the channeler of Sheltazar, a spiritual life coach and an energy intuitive. You've been listening to the Sheltazar podcast. We are very, very pleased to be launching a new stream on this podcast. We're rebranding it to the Jeffrey Eisen podcast. And I will be joining my host, Sarah Sanguino, for a segment called Ask Coach Jeffrey, where I will be answering some of those challenging questions that we all have that have come up many, many times in my coaching sessions. If you would like to submit questions to Ask Coach Jeffrey, please do so at jeffrey@jeffreyeisen.com. And if you would like to be a guest on the Sheltazar podcast, again, you can use that same email address. Thank you all so very much for listening. Love and light to you all. Until next time.